What if a single movie role didn't just change your career, but became a weight you had to carry for the rest of your life? For 30 years, the world hasn't seen Gary Sinise. They've seen Lieutenant Dan. But behind the magic legs and the foundation lies a secret burden that eventually forced him to walk away from Hollywood forever. We look at stars who win Oscars and expect them to chase the next blockbuster, to stack their shelves with trophies and build empires of vanity. But what happens when the character you play becomes more real to the world than the person you actually are? That is the parasocial trap Gary Sinise fell into. A gilded cage built from the collective gratitude of millions of military veterans who saw their own pain, their own trauma, and their own salvation reflected in a fictional double amputee from a 1994 film. It is a story of how a man's identity was completely consumed by his most famous creation, leaving him with no choice but to surrender his own dreams to carry the weight of a nation's broken heroes. To understand how we got here, we have to travel back to July 1994, when Robert Zemeckis' Forrest Gump took the world by storm. It was a year of cinematic giants, competing against the likes of Pulp Fiction and The Shawshank Redemption. Yet it went on to win 6 Academy Awards, including Best Picture, and cemented itself as a cultural touchstone. But while Tom Hanks captured hearts as the gentle-souled Forrest, it was Gary Sinise's raw, volatile performance as Lieutenant Dan Taylor that struck a different, far deeper nerve. Lieutenant Dan was a man destined to die on the battlefield, a descendant of soldiers who fought and fell in every American war, from the Revolution to Vietnam. Instead, he survived, saved by Forrest, but at the cost of both his legs and his sense of honor. The character's journey from bitter, alcohol-fueled despair in a dingy New York apartment to finding his magic legs and making his peace with God became a modern myth. But as the film marked its landmark 30th anniversary, the boundary between fiction and reality did not just blur, it vanished entirely. Gary Sinise was no longer just an actor promoting a milestone anniversary. He had become the physical manifestation of Lieutenant Dan's survival. For 3 decades, this role has dictated the trajectory of his life, transforming him from a highly sought-after Chicago theater veteran and Hollywood A-lister into a full-time, tireless advocate. Yet the public never stopped calling him Lieutenant Dan, demanding he carry a heavy mantle of responsibility that eventually eclipsed his passion for acting. This connection to the military was not entirely random. Although Sinise himself never served in the armed forces, he came from a family of veterans. His father served in the Navy during the Korean War, and his uncles fought in World War II. Playing Lieutenant Dan reconnected him to his roots and to his brothers-in-law who served in Vietnam, making the role feel less like a performance and more like a familial duty. But wait, the true cost of being Lieutenant Dan was not just a career shift. It was a dark, tragic irony that would soon strike Gary's own household, mirroring the very physical and emotional suffering he had spent decades trying to heal in others. While Gary was traveling the world building smart homes for severely wounded veterans and offering comfort to grieving families, a silent storm was brewing in his own home. In a devastating twist of fate, the year 2018 would bring a double diagnosis that shattered the Sinise family, testing Gary's faith, his strength, and the very foundation of his life's work. It forces us to ask a chilling question. How do you keep saving the world when your own family is quietly falling apart? To understand how Gary managed these immense burdens, we must first look at the unique phenomenon that put him on this path in the first place, the parasocial paradox. This is a state where the public forms an intensely real, one-sided emotional bond with a fictional persona, forcing the actor to live up to a standard they never actually signed up for. There are 3 powerful examples of how this paradox completely reshaped Gary Sinise's life. First, look at the physical letters that arrived in the mid-90s. Immediately after the release of Forrest Gump, Sinise was flooded not with standard fan mail praising his acting or asking for autographs, but with deeply personal, often agonizing letters from actual disabled Vietnam veterans. They wrote to him as if he were a fellow brother-in-arms, sharing memories of the battlefield and the subsequent neglect they faced upon returning home, secrets they had never told their own spouses or children. Second, consider the founding of the Lieutenant Dan Band. What started as a casual musical project in the early 2000s to entertain active-duty troops quickly became a demanding, globe-trotting tour schedule. Troops didn't want to see Gary Sinise, the award-winning actor, playing bass guitar. They chanted for Lieutenant Dan, forcing him to step on stage under his character's name to give them the morale boost they desperately craved. Third, we see this in the ultimate creation of the Gary Sinise Foundation in 2011. Sinise realized that simply attending charity events and shaking hands was no longer enough to satisfy the immense expectations placed upon him by the veteran community. The public's refusal to separate the actor from the soldier practically forced him to build a massive, real-world apparatus to heal the very wounds his character suffered on screen. He became a savior in real life because the world demanded he continue the work of the movie. But as the dual diagnosis of 2018 took hold, the abstract nature of this paradox became a painful, concrete reality. To truly grasp the weight of this period, we must look at the counterintuitive perspective of the caretaker. Gary Sinise had built his entire post-Hollywood identity on being the rock for others. He was the man who raised hundreds of millions of dollars, who built custom, state-of-the-art smart homes for severely wounded veterans through the RISE program, and who flew thousands of Gold Star children to Disney World. But in 2018, his wife Maura was diagnosed with stage 3 breast cancer. Just months later, while she was undergoing intensive chemotherapy, their only son, McKenna Anthony Sinise, was diagnosed with chordoma, an incredibly rare, slow-growing cancer of the spine that affects only 1 in a million people. Suddenly, the man who was the symbol of hope for America's wounded was completely powerless in the face of his own son's terminal illness. The public expected Gary to remain the indefatigable, smiling face of military support, while behind closed doors, he was navigating a living nightmare. His son underwent multiple spinal surgeries, radiation, and chemotherapy. The cancer was uncharacteristically aggressive, spreading rapidly through his body. This is the dark side of the parasocial paradox. When the world views you as an indestructible hero, they often forget that you bleed, mourn, and break just like anyone else. Gary could not simply retreat into private grief. He had a massive foundation relying on his leadership, and thousands of veterans depending on his advocacy. He had to wear the mask of Lieutenant Dan's resilience while watching his son slowly lose his mobility, a tragic, painful echo of the very disability that defined his iconic movie role. How did he manage this impossible duality? The answer lies in a complete, systematic restructuring of his life, a total pivot from self to service. To support his family and sustain his foundation, Gary systematically dismantled his Hollywood career. He stopped auditioning for major films and stepped back from high-profile television roles, like his run on CSI NY, which had previously provided a comfortable balance between acting and charity. This was a massive financial sacrifice, walking away from millions of dollars in salary, but Gary knew that his time and energy were now non-renewable resources. The mechanics of this transition required immense discipline. He redirected all his energy into the Gary Sinise Foundation, utilizing its organizational structure not just as a vehicle for charity, but as a sanctuary for his own grief. He leaned heavily into his Catholic faith, converting in 2010, which became the spiritual anchor allowing him to process the suffering around him. Furthermore, he empowered his son Mac to become an active participant in this mission. Despite being increasingly disabled and reliant on a wheelchair, Mac joined the foundation staff, working on digital media and music projects. This strategic integration of his personal tragedy with his public mission allowed Gary to keep moving forward without letting the immense pressure crush him. He proved that the only way to survive a personal tragedy of this magnitude is to channel that pain into a larger, collective purpose, turning his private burden into public grace. We see the profound impact of this philosophy in the final years of Mac's life. Mac was a deeply talented musician, a graduate of the USC Thornton School of Music. As the chordoma paralyzed him from the chest down, robbing him of his ability to play the drums and the bass, he did not surrender to despair. Instead, supported by his father and the foundation, Mac began collaborating with other musicians to record his original compositions. In his final months, he completed a deeply moving album titled Resurrection and Revival. When Mac passed away on January 5, 2024, at the age of 33, he left behind a testament of pure resilience. His father didn't just mourn him, he celebrated Mac's work, ensuring his music was shared with the world. This is the ultimate real-world application of the Lieutenant Dan legacy. Just as Lieutenant Dan had to find a new purpose after losing his legs, Mac found a way to create beauty and harmony while his body was failing. This shared journey of suffering and creation cemented the bond between Gary's fictional role and his real-life trials. It showed that the lessons of endurance he preached to veterans were the very lessons he had to practice at his son's bedside. Ultimately, Gary Sinise's life teaches us that our greatest burdens can also become our greatest callings. He could have remained a wealthy, comfortable Hollywood actor, insulated from the harsh realities of the world. Instead, he chose to carry the heavy, complex mantle of Lieutenant Dan, allowing a fictional character to guide him toward a life of profound, real-world utility. The weight did not break him, it built him. And as we look at his journey, we are forced to look at our own lives. When we are faced with our own inevitable trials, do we retreat into bitterness? Or do we, like Lieutenant Dan and Mac Sinise, stand up, find our magic legs, and march forward? If you want to understand how other legendary actors have had their lives completely rewritten by the roles they played, click on the video on your screen right now, where we break down the secret, untold sacrifices of Hollywood's most iconic figures.